So there is an issue here. We haven't got time to go into it in great detail, but there's an issue here about whether the West, President Biden, the Republican Party, a lot of European countries, really do want Zelensky to retake Crimea. I think they'd like to see him retake the territory in the provinces in the east of Ukraine, but Crimea is a really difficult sticking point, I think, in all of this. In all of this.
Ukraine's Defence Minister, Hanna Malaya, has claimed that new successes in the country's counter-offensive have allowed Ukraine to begin a corridor to Crimea. Russian forces being pushed back in southern strongholds of the south. Southern strongholds of Ukraine. It comes as the Foreign Office have also confirmed the death of 22-year-old British volunteer Sam Newey, who was killed in fighting in Ukraine. Meanwhile, of course, in the UK, Grant Shapps has become Defence Secretary, replacing Ben Wallace in a cabinet reshuffle, prompting questions about the future of Britain's foreign policy. Well, let's speak to General Tim Cross, retired British Army officer and logistic expert who joins us on Times Radio tonight. Hello, Tim.
Hi, Daryl.
Can we start with this counter-offensive then? These claims from Ukraine that gains have been made in the south that could lead to a corridor to Crimea. What are they worth?
Well, if I'm brutally honest, not a lot, really. But nonetheless, I hope they're right to a degree. One of the problems, and I've discussed this on other programs on Times Radio, but one of the problems is cutting out the sort of media hype and the propaganda and all the rest of it from reality. Mm-hmm. When you look at what's been happening over the last 3 months or so, I have to say I've found myself increasingly thinking of World War I and 1916 and offensives that gained, hundreds of feet, a few hundred yards at the cost of a lot of casualties. And there's been no doubt that this counteroffensive by Ukraine has been like that. I mean, they hoped that they would break through, not relatively quickly, not immediately, obviously, and then be able to adopt a maneuver warfare, drive through the Russian defenses, and retake quite a lot of ground. It reverted back to attritional warfare pretty quickly, in which infantry and artillery became the main players, and it's been a real hard slogging match. Now, one of the issues in all of this is the Crimea, which you referred to in your comment. The main village that was taken, and this recent potentially exploitation of a bit further, my understanding is it still has to kick through another couple of rounds of Russian defenses yet. But in theory, it would open up the route to the Azov and to Crimea. Actually, do we really want Ukraine to retake Crimea? Now, clearly, President Zelensky does, and quite a lot of Ukrainians probably do. But Crimea is, a really key issue in this, particularly when you look at it from a Russian perspective. And so there is an issue here. We haven't got time to go into it in great detail, but there's an issue here about whether the West, President Biden, the Republican Party, a lot of European countries, really do want Zelensky to retake Crimea. I think they'd like to see him retake the territory in the provinces in the east of Ukraine, but Crimea is a really difficult sticking point, I think, in all of this. In all of this.
And so why wouldn't they want Ukraine to take Crimea?
Because Russia, again, and you need to. I am not supporting a Russian perspective on this, but one of the great maxims of war is Sun Tzu, about 2,500 years ago, who said, "If you understand the enemy and understand yourself, you need not fear the outcome of 1,000 battles." Now, we can debate whether the West really understands itself today. That's a different issue. But do we understand the enemy? Russia's perspective of this is that Crimea is a part of Russia, always has been, always will be. Ukraine is a spiritual heartland of Russian orthodoxy, and they have a genuine belief that it belongs to Russia. Now, that said, I think Putin would not willingly give up quite a bit of the gains within Ukraine, but Crimea is a big sticking point for Russia, and they see it as Russian territory. So if we start seeing Ukrainian forces taking Crimea, then Russian response could be, pretty substantial, could ramp up.
Right.
I'm not saying I like that. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying we have to see this from a Russian perspective.
Right, I see. Could I get your perspective on Grant Shapps as well? New Defence Secretary today. Thoughts on that appointment?
Well, I have to tell you, it came as a flanker to me. His name would never have appeared on a piece of paper that I'd written down. I mean, I thought somebody like James Heppey, the current minister, John Glenn from the Treasury, who I know and is an excellent guy, Penny Mordaunt, who had been Defence Secretary for a short period, or one or two other people. I'm really surprised that this appointment has been made. I don't know Grant Shapps, but I do know enough to know that he knows, and I've got to be careful here, I don't want to be harsh, but as far as I understand it, he knows nothing about defence. And the reality is, of course, there's less than a year to go to a general election. The bottom line is he will be Secretary of State for Defence for less than a year. I mean, who knows what the general election will bring, but my money's on the fact they're going to get thrashed. So he's going to be out of a job pretty quickly. So what is he going to try and do in the next 12 months? Well, if he's got any sense at all, he will try to understand what Ben Wallace has put in place, who I happen to believe has been a very good Defence Secretary. Not that I've agreed with everything he's done, but I do think he's been very good. He's been there 4 years. He's put in place a lot of important stuff. And I think Grant Shapps needs to get his mind around what he was trying to achieve, endorse it, and continue the movement whilst he is in that office. And if he tries to do anything else, if he tries to be clever, then frankly, he's going to waste an awful lot of civil servants and military time, who, of course, are going to have to brief him and try and bring him up to speed to what the military is all about. So for me, it's a surprising appointment. It's not a very good appointment, and I'm disappointed. It's the truth.
We heard earlier from Sir Gerald Howarth. He was broadly supportive. He's a former defence minister himself, of course. He was he was sort of broadly supportive of this. I mean, he expressed a bit of surprise as well, but was broadly supportive of Grant Shapps and his ability. What do you think that? And he was making the point that, you know, ultimately as a minister, you are very often a generalist who is briefed by people who are experts around you. So that clearly will be the direction of travel for Grant Shapps at the Ministry of Defence. What do you think, though, are the risks attached to him not having personal experience?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of good points. As I say, I know Gerald, and is it a surprise that politicians within the Conservative Party would endorse this and be positive? Is it a surprise the Ukrainians would welcome it and speak highly of him? Of course it isn't. I mean, that's the world these guys operate in. I'm not sitting in any of those places. I'm just telling you what I think. Yeah. And I may. So I'm not surprised what Gerald says. He's right in saying, and I think it applies in industry. It applies in many walks of life, that the chief executive, the chairman of the board, the secretary of state in this case, tend to be generalists rather than experts in the particular issue or the company, the product or the commodity that they are overall responsible for. Now, I'm a crusty old general, so you'd expect me in a way to say something slightly different for the military, but I genuinely believe it is different for the military. I mean, media talks a lot about, brass hats and senior officers and all the rest of it. It's very easy to forget that everybody in the military, so take myself as an example, I started off as a cadet in 1964 at a college, as a sixth former Army college in 67, Sandhurst for 2 years, and then in 71, a second lieutenant, and then a lieutenant, a captain, a major, a lieutenant colonel, brigadier, before I became a general. I spent 30 odd years learning the trade of being in the military. And the military is not the same as running a business. There are business aspects to it, clearly, because there's a heck of a lot of money involved. Yeah. But the nature of warfare is very different. And Ben Wallace had a gut instinct for that because he'd served in the military, as indeed has James. So, but there have been other secretaries of state, of course, who haven't served in the military. We went through a period post-World War II where just about every one of them had served. I mean, people had been beach, like Anzio and all the rest of it. Yeah. And they were very, very good. But I do think he is at a serious disadvantage of not understanding instinctively and gut instinct what the military is about. Okay. Bringing common sense and an ability to sift through difficult issues and apply, intelligence and inverted commas, and come up with answers. Clearly, an intelligent, capable person, has value in that. Of course they do.
Okay, but it's about gut instinct that experience gives you.